Alright, so in this video I'm going to cover off how to create a master detail relationship using database objects. So I'm going to use, from the Northwind database, I'm going to use the order and order details tables. So demonstrate how to create an order, and within that order create a collection of details that are related to that order. So the first thing I'm going to do is basically create the root objects with the orders and the order details, the order and the orders. It's basically very similar to what you would do with the products and table, for example. So I'll just skip through that and I'll come back in a minute. Alright, so I've got a orders collection set up. Pretty simple really, and I'm just going to return the first order just for my demonstration, and I've got an order set up. Pretty simple, just a unique way to identify the order that we're actually getting back. Make sure we're getting back the right one. So the next step really is to, within the order, we want to create an order details collection that's linked to this particular order. So I'm going to create a new class called order details. And very similar to what you do for a normal collection in terms of setting up mapping. So we're setting up a mapping to the order details table. Let's have a quick look at that in the database. So I'm going to set up a table mapping. We also want to set up a subset. So we don't want to select everything in the order details table. We only want to select those things with a particular order ID. So there's two ways you can set up a subset attribute, which will by default use the parent's distinct value, so in this case the order ID, and match that against the name of this field here, which would be order ID as well. But there's the other way is to just override the subset function, which would be in here if we inherited from it. So create this class or edit. So if you override subset, you can just put in the conditions here that you want to filter down by whatever those conditions might be. Return that as the filter. You'll note here that I've selected volatile list rather than just database objects list. And the reason, the volatile list, all the volatile type classes are really just ones that hold everything in memory. So that collection is held in memory. If you add and remove, you delete, or anything like that, that all happens in memory. It's not persisted immediately until you call save, and then all those changes are made. So records, if you've added some records, they're inserted. If you've updated them, they're updated and deleted similarly. So what we want to do is we want to have an order and a collection of order details that are all held in memory as one sort of graph, object graph. And when we persist the order, then we persist the order and the order details. And we can wrap that up in a transaction to make sure that's all kosher. So that's what I'm going to do here. So we set up the table mapping, we set up the subset. I'm just going to set up something, just a field, something simple on the order details. I think there's a quantity. There's a quantity field that we can use. So there's a separate field mapping to the quantity. I think that's an int. And we'll just pass through the actual parent order, the parent collection. Okay, so at this point here, we've got the order detail line being loaded correctly. In the details, we should be able to enumerate through this. This volatile objects does implement IEnumerable. We do need to construct that, of course. Pass through the actual reference to the parent order. And then in the actual order, we do need to obviously reference the details. So I'm going to create an order details here. And we can load that up here. Now this is actually not going to work, but I'll explain that in a second why. So I'll put a breakpoint there, and in our program we'll just load the first order that we can grab, and we do need to set up that as a property. Orders. Okay, so we set up the collection. So we should be able to get our first order, so let's just have a look at that. And first, I'll just print that out for the moment. Let's just run that. Step over that. Okay, so we can see that it's tried to get the first, well, it has got the first order, has got the order details. We can see here that it's actually got a filter of is null, which is wrong, which is what I was explaining before. I'll explain that in a second, but first of all we need to get this order ID actually displayed, because I'm doing a debug write, not a console write. Okay. Okay, so we've got the 10248, right, good. So if I go back to the order detail, now the reason that we're doing a filter by null is because it's going to filter this order details. If we step into this base is going to run up and select all of the details from the order details using the parents, i.e. the order's distinct value. Now if we look at the distinct value on this, it's not set yet, because if you look at the order, we're still in the constructor. So at the end of, we need to wait and we need to load this at some other point once the reflection system has actually updated the order's distinct value. So there's two ways. You can either just lazily load this as you need, or you can just override the load field. So after everything's actually been loaded in the object, you can then assign the details. So we'll just move that there. That will essentially, what will essentially happen is the constructor will run, all the fields will then be set, and then essentially straight after this will actually load. So let's try that again. And we'll just write out, maybe we'll just write out all the details. I don't think I actually made that public. I'll just make that public for the moment, even though it's a little bit dodgy. Okay, so let's write out just that quantity value that we've got in there. Oops, one other thing I've forgotten to do. We do need a distinct field attribute on the order details. So this is just like a normal collection, the order details, so we do need to have a distinct. The two key things are always table and distinct field, so we do need to have a distinct field. Now, problem is though, on the order details table we don't actually have a unique way of identifying the object. You could, I guess, always delete all those records and then just repersist them. There's no reason you can't do that. It's up to you, I guess. But typically, there's usually a way of there's usually a unique identifier that you can use to actually, obviously identify each object within this subset. So within this subset 10248. So what I'm going to do is just add in a index. Gonna be really lazy. Just make it an identity field. Okay. Where's that? Yep. Okay, so now if we look at that, we should see we've got an index on there too. Brilliant. There's obviously better ways. You might want to either do it, or like I was saying before, just persist it, just delete everything and then persist it. And if you wanted to, you could do that very easily. You don't even need to write SQL or anything like that. You could essentially write object delete all. That would delete everything in this subset, and then just loop through it and write it out, each record. So the volatile list just helps a little bit more. It helps to simplify that a bit. So anyway, I'll just do it this way, because this is typically what you would do. So we've got a distinct field. That index is actually an auto-incrementing one. So when we persist or save that for the first time, insert it, then we do actually need to get that value back out of the database and put it in here, so any subsequent updates will work. So let's run that again. Good, so we can see some quantities in there. There's 3 records, which I think is correct. We've got 3 records, yep, 12, 10, and 5. Okay, so it's working. Of course, that's a little bit useless. You probably want to reference a product, for example, so there's no reason that you can't add in a product reference here. We can add in as we showed in the last video, you can set up an object reference and reference that. I'll just show that does still work here, even though it's a detail class. So we'll set up I'll just set up as an object reference. I won't bother wrapping it up, although that's typically what I would do. Product. So let's just initialize it with the actual collection that I would use. So base root. So it's using base active products. Let's just assume that the product exists in the active products collection. Obviously that's not ideal, but typically we'll just leave that for the moment. So there's new object reference. Okay. So we want to set up a mapping that would be mapping via the actual product ID. And so that'll put that product ID into this object reference, which has just has an ID field here somewhere. And then when you actually call product.object, it will actually load that out. Now, that'll do that lazily, but this is the way that this will work by default. When you actually call product, then it will do the work of actually loading it. But we can also do an object early binding, which will then force it. Then it will load the order details and do an inner join on the actual product table too, so that it loads it in one hit. So let's run that and let's print out the product object, product name. Okay, I will make it a field then. Cool, so we can see that it's joined it for us. It's joined the details with the products and the products with the supplier, because the product actually had a supplier on there too, as an early binding reference. So I'll just have a look at that just to confirm that. So yeah, there's a reference to the supplier as well. I think the category, yeah, and the category too. So that's why it's loaded all those. If you don't, in some circumstances you might not want it to do that. You might not want it to always load that. This is a lot of stuff that needs to link. So you can dynamically do this, right? It's not necessary that you do this every time. And if you want to, you can just override the table joins function. Okay, so this is loading the details. That works fine. What if you want to create a new one? Then we need to actually do some saving. So in here, what I would typically do, actually, what we might do in details, what you want to typically do is internal void save all. So this will save and this will persist all of the objects in here. Save all. Okay, so that'll enumerate through and do any updates, deleting, adding, whatever. Do all that work in here. If you do want to do some validation, you can implement DatabaseObject volatile, and if you want to, you can do some validating on the actual save. That's optional. So basically what this will do is in here we'll call, so look at the code, I guess, it's pretty easy. It will go through and delete all those objects, clear them internally, then it will actually call object save on each object in there. So it's pretty simple. We want to save the detail. Now, when we save the new detail, we do actually need to reference, when we save it, we want to reference that parent order ID. So we need to populate it with this. It was okay when we were reading it before, because we're just using it as a filter, but when we save a new record, we need to save the order ID so it's linked properly. I guess, don't know if product ID is actually required or not, but we'll see. So to do that, it's really fairly simple. Just set up it doesn't need to be int really, because we can get by with object. So order ID. Just set up a field mapping for that. So whenever this is called, because it's a get, it will only ever be called when it's persisting it, either updating it or inserting. So we want to return base of grandparent. So this will return the actual distinct. So they've got up the tree and find the parent's order. It's called grandparent because you're sort of going up to the grand order details, and then you're going from the order details to the order detail, to the actual order. That's why it's called grandparent. So that should then save that, and of course it'll save the product and the quantity, etc. So if we add a new record in here, using our first product, first order, we can do details.add. We'll just set to one of our products. Just use link for that. And detail quantity, say 1. Okay, so we do want to actually just need to call save, but we also do need to call details save all. Now, probably the other thing you want to do is set that up in a transaction. So I'll just demonstrate a simple local transaction rather than a potentially distributed transaction. So you can just set up a local transaction and set up the database. Completes so that it doesn't actually roll it back. So yeah, everything within all those statements will be within a begin transaction and then an end transaction at the end. So if I go back, I've created a new one, save that. It's going to save my objects. Of course, I haven't done something right. Field values have not been set. So there's no fields that it's been saving. That's strange. Let's have a look. We can have a look in here and see what it's actually doing. We can actually, if we wanted to, we can override the save fields just to get a sneak peek and see what's actually happening. So let's do that. So we should have some fields in here. Yep, we do. You can see the product ID has been set, quantity has been set, order ID has been set, which is good. So it's working. The interesting thing was that it was doing an update, which seems to indicate that it thinks it's saved, but it hasn't been saved yet, which is a little strange. So So yes, it's thinking the object has been saved for some reason. I don't know why. That should be false by default, so then we shouldn't be doing an update, we should be doing an insert, which is a little strange. This add will create a new volatile object. Let's have a look at that. So we should be able to see what's actually set on here is saved as false. Oh, so maybe it's the actual orders, the issue's not. Yeah, it looks like it's just the actual orders the problem. Which does actually make sense. So sorry about that, that's my fault. There are actual no fields that are being saved on here. Well, genius. You probably figured that out about 10 minutes ago. We'll just put, I don't know, something. Ship name. That'll do. Okay, so we've actually got something persisted. Wow. Let's try again. So it was nothing to do with the details, it's just purely the order wasn't being saved properly. So let's have a look at that now. So a whole lot of stuff here. So we can see our transaction. We're updating the record, the detail records, and then we're doing an insert into details, getting the ID back out. Here we are updating the actual order. So we've done all the details here, then we're updating the order and committing it. So if we have a look at our database now, we should have got another one in here, brilliant. Different product ID, order one, awesome. So that's working. So it's not too bad to set up, I don't think. It's fairly clear what's going on. Yeah, so that's it. Hopefully that was useful.